Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a short tutorial on how to paint a Primaris Space Wolf Reiver. Now the first colour that we're going to use is Vallejo Black. Now you can use any black on this, as long as it's not glossy. You don't really want a glossy finish on these sections. We're just going to be painting all these little joins in the armour so that they're all black. When we come back, we'll have all the black finished. The next colour that we're going to use is Vallejo Modeler Chrome. That's to do all the metallic sections of him. Now I've said before, the reason I like the Modeler Chrome colours is because they give such good coverage over pretty much any colour. When we come back, we'll have all the Modeler Chrome finished. The next colour that we're going to use is Vallejo Flesh Base, which is a nice base colour for the skin of the marine. Like so. Next up, we're going to be using Citadel Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to use that just to paint his face mask. Like so. Now we're just going to use Vallejo White. Just going to be doing his shoulder pad so that we can do Bran Redmore's Great Company. Now the annoying thing about white is it always dries streaky, so you have to do a couple of coats. That's not a problem. Once it's dry, just start that off again, give it another coat, and keep going until all the streaks are gone. Right, so just got to wait for this layer to dry. Now I'll carry on doing extra layers on that, build it up to a complete white. Next we're just going to use Retributor Armour from Citadel. And that's just going to be to do the little skull and cross blades on his chest. Like so. Next we're going to use Mournfang Brown. This is going to do all the straps and his pouches. When we come back, we'll have all the Mournfang brown finished. Now we're just using a little bit of Mephiston Red. That's just to do the purity seal on his backpack. Like so. The final colour that we're using is Vallejo US Olive Drab. Like so. Now we're moving on to the shades. The first shade that we're going to use is Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade. We're just going to try and keep this to all the recesses on the blue armour. The reason I'm doing this quite carefully is the Russ Grey, which I'm using for the base coat and I'll be reapplying after the shade, is quite thin, so that when I'm reapplying it you have to sometimes give it a couple of layers over where you've done the Drakenhof Nightshade. So I'm trying to keep it as close to the areas that I'm shading as possible with as little overspill, so there's not too much to do when we come back to putting the Russ Grey back on. When we come back, we'll have all the Drakenhof Nightshade finished. The next shade we're using is Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm just going to use that on the top of the purity seal. Like so. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of Reikland Flesh Shade. That's just going to be to do the skin. Like so. Now it's just Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use that to do the skull face and also the parchment on the purity seal. Like so. Next we're using Citadel Nuln Oil. That's going to be to do the knife and all the metallic parts. When we come back, we'll have all the Nuln Oil finished. Now we're going to go on to Agrax Earthshade. This is going to be to do all the bits with Mournfang brown. Like so. The final shade that we're using is Citadel Athonian Camo Shade. We're going to use that on the grenade. Like so. Now we're just going to be using Citadel Russ Grey. That's to build up the base colour, making sure that we leave some of the Drakenhof Nightshade in the recesses. When we come back, we'll have all the Russ Grey finished. Now that we've got the Russ Grey finished, I've now added a little bit of white to it. We're just going to highlight all the areas that will be catching the light. Do the arm, for example. So if I highlight his forearm here, I'm going to be highlighting the top 50%. When we come back, we'll have all this highlight finished. Now that we've finished that layer, we've just added a little bit more white to the Russ Grey. We're just going to do one final highlight on his armour. When we come back, we'll have this highlight finished. Now I've just switched to an Army Painter Wargame character brush. I'm just going to use Flesh Base Vallejo colour to reapply the skin on his head. I do take a lot of time with the painting the faces because there's a lot of detail on there that you can get, and they do look really good when they're painted up and you've taken your time on them. So this is the way that I usually paint the models. As a bit of an example, here's some of the faces on the other ones from the same squad. So I'm going to be aiming to paint this guy up in the same way. When we come back, we'll have all the flesh base finished. That's the base flesh done. We're just adding a little bit of white to the base flesh, and we'll do another highlight on his skin. Just going to change to a different brush. I'm going to use a Citadel Small Layer Brush to get the highlight on a bit quicker on the flat surface. When we come back, we'll have all this highlight finished. Just added a little bit more white to the mix. We're just going to do one final highlight. And back to the small layer brush just to do this top. Like so. Now we're going to be working on his face mask. We're going to be using Citadel Rakarth Flesh. That's just to put the base layer back onto the mask. Like so. Now I've just added some Citadel Ushabti bone to the Rakarth flesh, and we're just going to do one highlight on his mask with that. I want to get this looking quite bone-like, because the mask reminded me kinda a little bit like the old chaplains, and the fluff behind their masks being that they wore their predecessor's skull on part of their helm, so kinda wanted these to be wearing very bone-like face masks. Like so. The final highlight, we've just added a little bit of white to the Ushabti and Rakarth flesh mix. I'm just going to do a quick highlight to some of these bits. Like so. Next we're using Mournfang brown again. We're just going to do all the pouches, making sure that we leave the Agrax Earthshade in the recesses. Now one thing I've done since the last layer as well, just to let you know, is I've added some Agrax Earthshade to the gold here and the gold on his knife. I'm changing to the Wargamer character brush by Army Painter again, just so we can work on the creases on his holster. When we come back, we'll have all the Mournfang brown finished. Now we've just added a little bit of white to the Mournfang brown, and we're just going to add one final highlight to the pouches. like so. Right, now we're going to work on the purity seal, and the first colour that we're using is Citadel Mephiston Red, so we're just going to reapply some of that original base coat. Like so. Now we're just going to be using a little bit of Citadel Wazdakka Red, and that's just to put a little highlight onto the purity seal. The aim of this is just to highlight the areas that are at the top, so you're not going all the way around with it. And the final highlight that we're going to do is just using a little bit of Wazdakka Red mixed with white. Just going to do one little highlight on the top here. Like so. Next is Vallejo German Grey. That's going to be to highlight all the joints in his armour and his bolt pistol. When we come back, I'll have all the German Grey finished. Next we are just using a little Rakarth flesh, and we're going to start working on the purity seal. Now we're just going to add a little tiny bit of white to the Rakarth flesh, to lighten that up a bit. I'm going to do a little highlight on the seal. Like so. I'm just going to add another spot of white to the mix that we've just used to do a final highlight. This one's a lot lighter. I'm going to use this on the very upper edges of the ridges, on the corners. Like so. Final thing that we're going to do for the purity seal is just use either black or the German Grey that you've just used. I'm going to be using German Grey because I've got a bit left over on the palette, and just do a few little lines so there's text on the seal. Like so. Now we're just going to use a little bit of pure white just to do his eyes, and one little highlight on the skull mask as well. Now for his eyes, you want to be working with a downward stroke. I've got a little bit of white on the end of the brush here. I want to do the other side in the same way. Like so. Okay, the video timed out then. Ran out of space, so the only bits that I did there was when I was adding the white to his mask was just under each eye, a little bit on top of the nose, and on the top of each tooth. Now all we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit more Vallejo chrome just to add a few more little silver bits to his pistol, and to do the studs and the end of the wires on his head. The only other thing we're going to do with the chrome is go along the edge of the knife blade to make it look nice and shiny. Like so. I'm just going to use a little bit of white to go around the edge where we've got the sepia here and smooth that out a little bit. Like so. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of the Vallejo German Grey to do his eyes. We're just going to use a little bit of the Mephiston Red that we've got left over. And we're just going to do the wires on his head. Like so. The final thing that we're going to do with his head is going to use a little bit of Citadel Carrowbird Crimson. We're just going to put a little bit of that around where these metal bits are. Like so. Now we're going to be working on Bram Redmore's company badge. You can see that I've done a pencil outline of the badge on his shoulder pad. All I'm going to do is trace over that with some black. Now if you do go wrong when you're doing the freehand stuff, all you need to do, paint over it with a bit of white and try again, because it is just a practice thing when you're trying to do freehand. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Now I'm going to use some of that Mephiston Red to do the lower half. I'm just going to tidy that up, straighten out this ear, and then that will be the model finished. Now one thing that I'd forgotten about was just finishing off the gold on his chest there, on the handle of his knife. All we're going to do is use a little bit of Retributor armour to go over the raised sections. Like that. The final colour that we're going to use on him is Liberator Gold. That's just to do one little highlight on the tops of these gold sections. Like so. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much.